Useless people have no place here. Just before the presentation, I had been suddenly assigned. That's what was written in the text sent to my phone. Travis, the department manager who sent this, clearly doesn't care about the company at all. He's probably only focused on belittling the people he dislikes. Because Travis hates me, he's using this opportunity to embarrass and crush me. However, I can't afford to mess up here and cause damage to the company. Determined, I gather my composure and start introducing the product with the appropriate language for the situation. Fortunately, I managed to pull it off, but I can't just let Travis have his way. I had already put a certain plan into motion. Soon enough, those items I entrusted to several people would come in handy. Thinking of that moment, I quietly keep recording data for my eventual retaliation. My name is Matthew, and I turned 33 this year. What I like are efficient work and harmonious relationships with my colleagues. I value connections with people and have always interacted with many others since my school days. By talking to people from different backgrounds, I learned diverse perspectives and ways of thinking, which have been incredibly helpful in my current job. However, close colleagues have often asked me about it with curiosity. Matthew, why do you work so hard? Everyone else leaves on time. To that, I always reply, well, pretending to be someone I'm not is just stressful and a waste of time. Doing what I want to do is way more fun. At the time, I think I could say something like that because I was young and didn't know much about the world. I hadn't considered that many people have circumstances that prevent them from asserting what they want. Still, I don't regret saying those words. Because, by saying them, I ended up meeting many like-minded people. I see, Matthew, that's pretty admirable. Maybe I'll try to find others who want to work harder too. If I said something like that now as an adult, it probably wouldn't work out the same way. Back then, we were young, and we happened to be surrounded by understanding people, so things turned out well. Matthew, I found so many people who shares the same value. 5 people. That's amazing. Alright, from now on, we're a team with the same vision. From that day on, we talked about our ideals regardless of our departments or positions. We exchanged new ideas and taught others efficient ways to work. Those accumulated memories are the essential foundation of who I am today. Currently, I work for a major company with a global presence. It's a company with top-tier achievements in the industry and one that many people admire. Whenever I introduce myself and say I work there, people are always surprised. But recently, I've had a bit of a problem with a particular newcomer who keeps calling me incompetent. Even small mistakes lead to long lectures, and it's been bothering me. June brought the rainy season. The gloomy weather that had lingered for so long suddenly gave way to a clear, brilliant sky stretching above us. As I stared at the bright sky and headed to work, I stepped into the sales office only to hear Travis's shouting voice. I sighed, thinking, here we go again. Why can't you get something this simple done quickly? Everyone else manages just fine. You're unbelievably slow. That's Travis, the department manager, berating one of the colleagues. Travis is a man in his 30s who recently transferred to the sales department. Wearing an expensive suit, a luxury wristwatch, and a gleaming wedding ring, he looks like the epitome of success. His desk reflects the same image, cluttered with high-end stationery and the latest tablet devices. Even the small ornaments tucked into the corner are flashy, covered in golden embellishments that feel out of place in the office. Travis lashes out at his subordinates over the smallest annoyances. Most of all, his insults are especially sharp when results don't meet his expectations. I promised Mr. Stevens I would do a proper job as department manager. If my subordinates are incompetent, they'll just drag me down. Useless people aren't needed here. Get back to work. The colleague being scolded apologized, saying, I'm very sorry, before quickly returning to his desk. Oomph, young people like that shouldn't even bother joining this company. They'd have been better off somewhere else. Still fuming, Travis turned his attention to me as well. Hey, you! Useless employee. Stop standing around and get back to work. Time is limited, you know. Yes, sir. Not wanting to endure yet another long lecture, I quietly returned to my desk. Watching the exhausted colleague, I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I walked up to the colleague and tapped them on the shoulder. Rough day, huh? This isn't much, but have it during your break. I handed him an energy bar I had stashed in my pocket and returned to my seat. It's not something to brag about, but I know most of my colleagues' preferences pretty well. After working here for over 10 years, it's only natural. That's why I always carry small snacks in my pocket to help out my colleagues in times of need. This might help for now, but it's still just a temporary fix. There are several other colleagues who've also been pushed to the edge by Travis's constant berating. This situation needs to be resolved sooner rather than later. While I was thinking about that, I didn't even notice that Travis was watching me. A notification buzzed on my phone as I continued my work. It was a text from Mr. Stevens. Puzzled, I began reading the message. Later that day, after speaking with Mr. Stevens in the conference room, I decided to carry a small recording device in the pocket of my suit jacket. A few days later, I discreetly keep a recorder in my chest pocket while working in another department's office. The place where I currently work is the Overseas Business Department. Here, several team members had gone on maternity leave around the same time, leaving the department severely understaffed. Because it wasn't a great time to hire new colleagues, they decided to bring in experienced help from other departments, me, in this case. I'd helped out here a few times before, so I knew I could be of some use. Glad to have you on board. I trust you more than others, Matthew, and you're already somewhat familiar with how things work here. Tiffany, a woman in her 30s who welcomed me warmly. Understood. I'll be in your care for a while. Because I'd helped this team before, their reaction to me joining was fairly calm. Blending in naturally, I dove into my tasks, working hard to fill in where help was most needed. But that wasn't the only reason I was here. Actually, I'd been secretly assigned a mission by Mr. Stevens. It is to investigate Travis's problematic behavior. I must have angered Travis somehow. When I was informed of my transfer to the Overseas Business Division, he had looked at me with a smug grin. Before moving, he'd also dumped far more grunt work on me than usual. I'm certain it wasn't just my imagination. As I sorted through documents, half occupied with these thoughts, another colleague spoke up. Are you doing okay, Matthew? If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm fine, really. With things as hectic as they are, any help you can give us is a huge relief. Thank you. I'll make sure to reach out if I need anything. I had only stopped working because I was lost in thought, but I still felt a little embarrassed. I need to focus and get back to work to avoid becoming a burden to others. Almost as if she had read my mind, Tiffany spoke up. You were just deep in thought, weren't you? How are you doing? Managing okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks to your support, I'm getting by. I really appreciate it. Tiffany is a colleague my age, also in her 30s. We joined the company at the same time and have been working together as peers ever since. We understand each other well but maintain an appropriate level of professionalism at work. Since our early days as new colleagues, we've seen a lot together, both at work and outside it. After years of sharing struggles and successes as peers, we've come to understand each other's personalities and working styles deeply. Unfortunately, we're now in different departments, but after more than a decade at the same company, we both have a good sense of how each other's teams operate. Of course, only within the limits that do not violate confidentiality. If there's something you're unsure of, talk to Melissa or Kevin, okay? If you need help organizing documents, Samuel is your guy. And if it's technical jargon, George knows it inside out. Perfect. Sounds like you know exactly who to go to. Tiffany clapped her hands with an amused smile on her face. You're in a good mood today. What's up? Well, remember that overseas company I've been reaching out to for ages? It looks like they're finally interested in our products. They want us to give them a presentation soon. Our company had long been trying to negotiate with a major American corporation, but talks had never quite materialized. Recently, though, it seemed like they were beginning to consider the deal, so the overseas business division was abuzz with excitement. I don't know the details, but good luck. Of course. If I need any help, I'll let you know, so be ready. I don't think there'll ever be a situation where we'd need just an extra hand. I look at Tiffany, amused yet fond, as she enthusiastically gets ready. Tiffany has always been a forward thinker, unafraid to take on challenges and push boundaries. She's never concerned about department lines and frequently proposes ideas to benefit the company as a whole. Lately, she's been advocating for developing new products aimed at overseas markets. Unlike Travis, Tiffany never looks down on people because of their age or experience. Honestly, I've often wished Travis could learn a thing or two from her. With that thought, I refocused on my work, putting my skills to use by organizing English language materials. I returned completed files to their shelves. Ideally, everyone would put files back properly after using them, but when things get busy or when someone's distracted, mistakes happen. It's a task that needs regular attention, and for someone like me, stepping in as a temporary helper, it's the perfect job. As I concentrated, Travis suddenly entered the Overseas Business Division office. He approached Michael, the department head. I came to check on my colleague. Mind if I walk around a bit? No, go right ahead. Even though Michael was older, he didn't seem to be able to stand up to Travis. I promised Mr. Stevens I'd do a proper job as department manager. If my subordinates are useless, they'll just drag me down. I don't know whose words were murmured in that moment. For me, it wasn't the speaker but what was said that caught my attention. The moment Travis showed up, murmurs of dissatisfaction started to ripple through the office. I couldn't help but overhear snippets of their comments as I worked, mentally taking notes. It's unfair. He became manager through connections, not skill. Now he's wasting time walking around other departments. I heard Michael can't stand up to him because Travis has something on him. I feel bad for anyone stuck working under that guy. I'd always felt there was something off about Travis. His rise to the position of department manager at such a young age had struck me as odd, so these murmurs only confirmed my suspicions. While I mulled over these thoughts, I turned and realized, to my surprise, that Travis had gotten much closer to me than I'd expected. Grinning smugly, he walked right up to where I was sitting. Looks like you're fitting in here nicely. Sending you here as a helper was the right call after all. Is that so? I struggled to find the right words, and my face must have looked tense with nerves. But Travis, of course, misinterpreted it entirely. You seem to be struggling, so I'll have you stay here for a while. Do your best. He assumed my expression was because I couldn't keep up with the work here. Even without Travis asking, I intend to work hard because I don't want to trouble my kind and supportive colleagues. Oh, by the way, everyone here graduated from top-tier universities. Since you're from a third-tier university, you must feel out of place. But don't even think about running away. Hearing those words, I felt something unsettling about what Travis had said. A third-tier university? Where did you hear that? The other day, I saw one of your colleagues drunk at a bar and got quite a bit out of them. I get it, having a mediocre academic background might make someone want to hide their incompetence. But keeping track of this kind of information is part of a department head's job. Don't take it personally. It was likely the alcohol talking, loose lips and muddled memories. I didn't actually graduate from a third-tier university, but I figured it might cause trouble if I were called a liar or something. So I decided to keep my real background hidden. I may end up being labeled as incompetent while keeping my background hidden, but since I'm working in the overseas business department now, I'm fine with that. Satisfied with my silence, Travis smirked and left the room. After that, I was assigned a certain business negotiation by Michael. It was with the major American corporation Tiffany had mentioned. Honestly, as a temporary helper, this shouldn't have fallen on me. It had Travis's fingerprints all over it. He was leveraging something as important as a future-defining deal for personal reasons, throwing me into the fire. He doesn't seem like someone suited for the position of department head. The following weeks were grueling. With the weight of the company's future on my shoulders, I couldn't afford to mess up. The stress gnawed at my stomach. Each night on my way home, I grabbed energy drinks from my favorite shop just to keep going. Thankfully, my colleagues rallied around me. Tiffany, especially, stayed late to help me prepare, and I couldn't be more grateful. Thanks. If you hadn't helped, this would have been so much worse. Helping a friend is just what you do. But you owe me a nice meal when this is over, okay? I know. I'll treat you to the best dinner you've ever had. Then came the day of the event. At last, the fateful day has arrived. With all the necessary materials in hand, Tiffany and I headed to the client's office. After giving our names at reception, we were escorted to a meeting room. The moment we walked in, a foreign colleague greeted us in English, catching me by surprise. At that moment, I realized what Travis had been planning. A confused Tiffany leaned in and spoke to me in a low voice. Wait, do we have to handle this in English? Looks like it. Guess we've got no choice but to face it head on. Face it? Wait, you can do this, right? When Tiffany responded with a questioning look, I decided to show her through my actions. Seeing me begin to handle the situation in English, her eyes widened in surprise. The negotiation went surprisingly well, the atmosphere positive and encouraging. It seemed the client had intended to partner with us from the very beginning. The discussion even extended to post-deal logistics and planning. As the meeting progressed, more Japanese colleagues began trickling into the room. Clearly, the deal's importance had drawn in leaders from various departments. At this point, the discussion had become too detailed for me to handle alone. I was about to explain the situation to the newly joined Japanese colleague and suggest that we call it a day. However, it seems the situation wasn't that simple after all. Excuse me, isn't there a product presentation scheduled in the main conference room right after this? We'll guide you there now unless you have another engagement? Tiffany and I instinctively exchanged glances, both of us saying, huh? Wait, I didn't hear anything about this. Is this some kind of mistake? No, it's probably Travis pulling the strings again. But since we've got everything we need, it's better to handle this without making a scene. I had already committed to seeing this through, and an extra challenge wouldn't change that now. We headed to the main conference room for round 2. On the way, I received a text from Travis. The timing was so perfect, so pointed, that I couldn't help but begrudgingly admire his pettiness. Is it time for the presentation yet? The text continued with a stream of meaningless filler, but I skipped to the end where it concluded. Useless people have no place here. It was then I remembered, he still believed that nonsense about my academic background. When we reached the main conference room, I stepped onto the stage that had been prepared. Taking a deep breath, I quickly organized the flow of the presentation in my mind, planning to deliver it in both Japanese and English to suit the multinational audience. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I said this first in Japanese, then immediately switched to fluent English. At first, I noticed some people tilting their heads in confusion at my words, and I couldn't help but nod in understanding. It seemed that everyone here had been told the product explanation would be given in English. As I continued speaking, referencing the materials and explaining the product in detail, I scanned the room. The audience appeared attentive, without any trace of hostility. Clearly, there was no one here trying to sabotage me. As I stood on stage continuing my presentation, I noticed someone new entering the large conference room. It was Travis, who was supposed to be back at the company. Perhaps he had come to check whether his subordinates were handling the presentation properly. However, when he saw me explaining fluently, he looked visibly surprised. Before long, his face contorted with frustration, and he left the room without a word. After the presentation, Tiffany and I returned to the office. I gave my report to the Overseas Business Division and then stopped by the sales department. It felt oddly nostalgic after working in a different department for so long. As I looked around, I noticed something familiar sitting on my colleagues' desks, the small recording devices I had distributed earlier. Seeing them still there, untouched, reassured me that my plan was progressing smoothly. But Travis wasted no time. He stormed over to me with a scowl. "I saw that. What the hell was that about? No one told me anything. What do you mean that? Don't play dumb. You were speaking fluent English at the client's company, weren't you?" I had only asked to make sure there was no mistake, but it seemed he thought I was messing with him. Travis glared at me, slamming his desk forcefully with a loud bang. "I didn't know you could speak English that well. Were you lying to us this whole time? And on top of that, I heard you introduced yourself as a graduate from a top-tier university during the negotiation." I was shocked when I heard about it from one of the client's colleagues on the way back. I never intended to lie. I made it clear during my self-introduction to Travis from the very beginning. The day Travis became manager, all the colleagues had introduced themselves, but clearly, he hadn't been paying attention. Travis glared at me, furious. With a sudden motion, he grabbed a pen from his desk and hurled it at me. I had anticipated the move and easily sidestepped it. Undeterred, Travis began throwing more items, his pencil case, a folder, even a crumpled wad of paper, until, eventually, his desk was cleared except for one item, a recording device. Seeing it, he finally seemed to regain some composure. "Fine. Let's stay calm." Changing his approach, he steadied his breathing and, with a look of frustration, grabbed my hand firmly. "Well done. You really came through this time. I'm so proud of you." From the outside, it might look like a boss showing care for his subordinate, but no one knows the truth better than I do. Travis's mouth is twitching, and more than anything, the incredible force gripping my hand says it all. It felt like I was a small animal caught in a snake's coils. Still, I had no choice but to endure it. After holding the handshake for a good several seconds, Travis finally let go and snorted dismissively. "Don't get cocky. I'll make sure you're out of here one way or another." With that venomous warning, his voice dropped into a threatening growl. After taking a deep breath to calm himself, Travis turned away. "Get back to your work. I don't want to waste any more time talking to you." Of course, I felt the same way. Since I had nothing to say to Travis, I quickly left the scene. A week had passed since then. Travis continues to subject me to small acts of harassment. That said, most of them are fairly trivial. He would drop by to nag me for trivial reasons or send me out to buy lunch for him like I was some errand boy. Thankfully, he rarely came around when I was working with other departments, so I had some peace. I was carrying several sheets of paper for colleagues who preferred sketching designs on paper rather than using a computer. Tiffany, always willing to help, grabbed half the load and struck up a conversation. "Now that you mention it, Travis used to pop by here all the time, but I haven't seen him around lately." I thought back over the past couple of days before answering. "Yeah, you're right." I wasn't sure if Travis was finally reflecting on his actions or if he was quietly plotting something else. The latter possibility left me uneasy. I'd managed to pull off that negotiation and presentation successfully. But if I had failed, the entire company would have faced serious repercussions. Well, I can't say I miss him. But hey, you're using a different recorder today, aren't you? I glanced down at my chest pocket and smiled faintly. Sharp eye. The old one's been acting up, so I sent it in for repairs. This one's a replacement. Ha! Still, why do you always carry a recorder around? Oh, well. I hesitated slightly in my response. I couldn't exactly tell her I was using it to document Travis's behavior. It's for work. Sometimes ideas pop into my head, and it's easier to record them as voice memos. Wow, that's very you, Matthew. Always so dedicated to your job. Her compliment made me think of Travis again. Travis, being Mr. Stevens's relative, lived a life of luxury. He often replaced his belongings, clothes, gadgets, and accessories on a whim and carelessly discarded what he no longer wanted. Every time I saw him do that, I couldn't help but feel saddened for the craftsmen and manufacturers who put their effort into making those items. It was clear he'd never once thought about the people behind the products he used. Speaking of your recorder, I remember seeing you talking to Mr. Stevens about a month ago. I could have sworn you two were discussing something about recorders. Oh, that? It was nothing. He was just asking for my opinion on a new product. Tiffany gave me a long, steady look before turning her gaze elsewhere. Well, if it's something you can't talk about, I won't press you. It seemed she had seen right through me. It wouldn't be long before I could tell her the truth, but lying to a friend still left me feeling guilty. While we were talking, it seemed the break time had arrived. Colleagues began wrapping up their work and leaving the office one after another. Some headed to the cafeteria, while others went to the convenience store, each with their own plans. Amid all this, the two of us left the company to visit a nearby ramen shop. As we walked, students passed by in front of us, perhaps finished early due to exam periods or shortened school hours. Those university days feel so nostalgic. As I muttered that while watching the young people, Tiffany nodded in agreement, saying, "Yeah, that's true." At 33, you start to look back on that time with nostalgia. Back then, even when we messed up, we had adults to step in and help us out. I'm so grateful for that. You've always been a challenger. Of course. I had so many things I wanted to try. I was lucky to have teachers and mentors who let me explore freely. Tiffany had attended a different university than I had, but she'd clearly made the most of her time there. I knew she'd participated in study abroad programs, interned at startups, and taken on countless challenges. But I don't think Travis had the same kind of experience. What do you mean? The other day, I ran into him in one of the company hallways. He wasn't alone, he had this big, bodyguard-looking guy with him. Really? That's interesting. Yeah. That man was loudly telling Travis, "If you're going anywhere, let me know." He spoke as if they'd known each other for years. I see. Maybe Travis feels trapped by all that. I had only ever known Travis as the tyrant in the office. I'd never considered what his personal life might be like. But if what Tiffany said was true, living under the watchful eye of a bodyguard sounded suffocating. Maybe Travis grew up in an environment where taking risks or making mistakes wasn't allowed. With that somber thought hanging in the air, we walked in silence toward our usual ramen spot. After lunch, we returned to the office just a few minutes before the break ended, only to find my desk in complete disarray. This is awful. Who could have done this? For the time being, I asked the people who had been eating their lunch indoors what had happened, but they only turned pale and said nothing. I recognized this reaction immediately. It was the same look I'd seen on colleagues who had been screamed at by Travis. Clearly, they'd been intimidated or threatened into keeping quiet. I turned to a nearby desk, where one of my colleagues was sitting, and discreetly retrieved the small recorder I'd given him earlier. Tiffany noticed and tilted her head in confusion. Wait a minute. Isn't that one of those recorders you gave out? Yeah, I asked them to keep it on their desks, just in case. Just in case? What do you mean? I explained the recorder in detail to Tiffany, who looked puzzled. After hearing that, Tiffany let out a sigh of admiration, as if it all made sense to her. Wow, so that's what those little gadgets were for. I just thought you were a recording enthusiast or something. Hey now, I do like recorders, for the record. Yeah, we can discuss your tech hobbies later. But Travis is going to lose his mind when he finds out about this. I nodded. Travis had run rampant for far too long, mistreating colleagues and abusing his authority. It was finally time to bring all of this to light. The following day, when I arrived at the office, I was immediately summoned along with Travis. The destination was the president's office. After meeting up with Travis along the way, we entered the room, where the person sitting at the desk looked directly at us. The man responsible for carrying this company on his shoulders was Mr. Stevens, who also happened to be Travis's uncle. Though he was in his 50s, he maintained a youthful appearance that could easily pass for someone a generation younger. His hair was naturally streaked with gray, and he wore a simple, unadorned suit. At a glance, he might seem like an unassuming middle-aged man. However, he was the exceptional figure who had taken this company from the brink of collapse to rapid growth in just a few years. Travis, seemingly unable to understand why Mr. Stevens had summoned us, glanced around the room in confusion, his gaze wandering restlessly. Sir, what is this about?" Perhaps unable to endure the heavy atmosphere in the room, Travis stammered as he opened his mouth. In response, Mr. Stevens sighed and looked at Travis's face. "Travis, you've let me down." Saying that, Mr. Stevens pulled out a paper bag, likely from behind his desk. Inside it was the small recorder I had distributed to my colleagues. While I had been working in the sales department, those recorders had been sitting on my colleagues' desks as mere decorations. However, the time had come for them to serve their purpose, so they were all collected at once. "Why are those here?" Unable to keep up with the situation, Travis turned his gaze toward me. His look seemed to ask if I knew something about this. However, I said nothing. Mr. Stevens pulled a small recorder out of the desk drawer. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary recorder, but when Mr. Stevens pressed a small button on its side, the outer casing opened, revealing another, even smaller recorder inside. That's. As Travis stared in shock, Mr. Stevens began to explain. "As you can see, this is a disguised recorder. Matthew used it to record your words, the countless intolerable insults you hurled. When I listened to them, I had no choice but to reflect on my own foolishness." "No, Uncle. It's not like that. This is." Travis's face paled in an instant, and with a trembling voice, he spoke to Mr. Stevens. However, even when faced with his panicked nephew, Mr. Stevens showed no sign of being shaken. "Be quiet. I don't recall giving you permission to make excuses." At the sound of his uncle's cold voice, Travis let out a startled cry and stepped back. I believed it was my duty to honor my sister's wishes and raise her child without hardship. But it seems I made a mistake. Hearing such unexpectedly personal words, I froze, unsure of how to respond. While I had my own thoughts about Travis, I couldn't pretend to be unaffected when listening to someone's private matters. Besides, I never intended to become the kind of person who takes pleasure in someone else's misfortune, so I simply didn't know how to react. "Travis, you're fired. I gave you the position of department manager because I thought you were capable. But I was wrong. It seems I must now question everything, your school records, the praise I once heard from your teachers, everything." Having said that, Mr. Stevens shifted his gaze away from his nephew Travis and looked at me. His demeanor clearly signaling that the conversation was over. Travis, who had just been informed of his dismissal, whispered in a faint voice, "Wait. Please, I'll do better from now on. So forgive me." "I'm sorry, Uncle. People don't change so easily. You failed in your role as a manager, and I have no reason to give you another chance." "No. No way. Do you hate me, Uncle? Until now, you've always given me everything I asked for. That was when you were a child. But now you're an adult, and I will treat you as one." He must have realized there was no longer any room for appeal. Hearing those words, Travis clung to Mr. Stevens, sobbing uncontrollably like a child. However, Mr. Stevens said nothing to his nephew and instead turned his gaze toward me. "Well done, Matthew. Thanks to you, we avoided what could have been significant damage to this company. You also handled the recent negotiation admirably. I was right to trust you with this task. Thank you, sir." Mr. Stevens had apparently been suspicious for some time about the high number of colleagues in the sales department taking leave. In fact, the reason I ended up working in the overseas business department was due to a secret request from Mr. Stevens. While I was still in the sales department, I received an email from him. The email detailed my transfer to the overseas business department and a certain confidential mission. Mr. Stevens, suspicious about the frequent leaves being taken in the sales department, asked me to uncover the cause. Officially, my move was framed as providing support to the understaffed overseas business department, but in reality, I was tasked with investigating Travis's behavior. That's why I used the recorder to document Travis's actions in words. Now, the problem was resolved. And yet, despite everything, I felt a lingering unease. Believing that things couldn't stay as they were, I gathered my courage and spoke to Mr. Stevens. "Sir, I know it's not my place, but is there really no way Travis can be given another chance?" Hearing those words, Mr. Stevens looked surprised. After checking on the still crying Travis, he turned his gaze directly to me. "You don't hold any resentment toward Travis for what he did?" "I do resent him. But it's also true that I've only been handling this work for a few months, and, honestly, I was genuinely happy to know that you, Mr. Stevens, had expectations for me." I recounted an incident to Mr. Stevens that had happened a short while ago. There was a time when I had checked whether the recorder was working properly, and during that moment, I overheard something Travis had said. "Uncle believes I can do this, that I can be a department manager. I can't let those other guys drag me down. I have to work hard and prove myself." From those words, I sensed a deep affection for his uncle. There were other signs, too, that Travis genuinely cared about him. Despite his tendency to throw away anything he no longer needed or grew tired of, there was one thing Travis refused to discard, even as it became worn and battered. It was the wristwatch he mentioned during his self-introduction as sales department manager, a gift from his uncle when he was a child. "If anyone touches this watch, I won't let it slide. This is something precious my uncle gave me." Seeing Travis's attitude toward the watch, I came up with an idea. If there was something he valued, then perhaps he could learn to respect what others held dear, too. With that thought in mind, I decided to give my colleagues small recorders as gifts. "This will be useful for jotting down work ideas," I told them as I handed out the recorders, though, in truth, they served a different purpose. It was to record Travis's inappropriate behavior. But to my colleagues, the recorders would be meaningful gifts. That way, I figured Travis wouldn't dare tamper with them. Hearing this, Mr. Stevens looked at Travis with a surprised expression. After a brief moment of thought, he addressed Travis in a calm voice. "I failed to see the harm my nephew was causing. That is my mistake. Fine, Travis, I'll give you one last chance. But you will step down from your position as department manager." Hearing Mr. Stevens' words, Travis broke down, tears streaming down his face as he collapsed on the spot. Sensing it was time to leave, I gave a brief farewell and quietly exited the room. Later, when I reported the outcome, Tiffany sighed and said, "You're too soft." But I felt it was the right thing to do. Because I believe that if anything can be undone, then it's worth trying to start over again. Travis's road to redemption, however, was far from easy. He was reassigned to grueling warehouse duties, or he worked long hours on his feet. I heard that on days when inventory numbers didn't match up, his supervisors reprimanded him harshly. On particularly harsh days of scolding, I heard he goes crying to his uncle. Some nights, exhausted from overtime, he sat in the cafeteria venting to colleagues, "My uncle and my boss are both so heartless." Still, he had been given a chance, and now it was up to him to make the most of it. As for me, I've been struggling every day since taking over as department head in Travis's place. Having been promoted to department head in his stead, I've had a hard time adjusting to my new role. The responsibilities were heavier than I had anticipated, and the late nights piled up as I adjusted to my new role. But despite the challenges, I found purpose in the work. Recently, one of Tiffany's ideas was adopted by the company, and plans are underway to manufacture a new product for the overseas market. We're now working hard to bring it to life. We have to do our best to create a product that can be used internationally. You're right. Being a department head is tough, but if I have time, I'll try to come up with a design that can actually be turned into a product. Hoping to create something that can succeed in the global market, we continue to dedicate ourselves to our work today. And then, today, I made a life-changing decision. For years, I had been keeping a secret. I was the adopted son of the CEO of a major corporate group. When I was in college, my mother remarried. My stepfather, who had no children of his own, chose me as his successor. But at the time, I wasn't ready. I knew that inheriting such a position without the skills or experience to back it up would be meaningless. So when I graduated, I turned down my stepfather's offer to join his company. Instead, I pleaded to start at a smaller, less prominent firm where I could learn from the ground up. I argued that understanding the operations of subsidiaries and tackling real challenges would make me a better leader in the long run. Reluctantly, my stepfather agreed, and I joined this company anonymously. Only Mr. Stevens had been made aware of the truth. I've been building my skills while working at this company. Now, I feel that I've gained enough experience. So today, I called my adoptive father and told him I was ready to return as the CEO of the entire group. He was delighted, and it was decided that I would officially take over next month. From now on, I will carry even greater responsibilities, using the experience I've gained so far. I intend to give my all for the growth of the group and, above all, for the happiness of the colleagues. When I told Tiffany about this decision, she was surprised but gave me her heartfelt congratulations. "Matthew, you're going to be an incredible CEO." "I know it. But promise me you'll still come visit us sometimes." "Of course. I wouldn't be here without you, Tiffany. You're part of the reason I've come this far." While I feel some anxiety about this new challenge, I am filled with excitement even more. I will never forget my humble beginnings and will continue to embrace a mindset of constant learning. With that vow in my heart, I began preparing to open the next chapter of my life.